The antique shop stood at the edge of the city, a squat, unassuming building sandwiched between a boarded-up bookstore and a vacant cafe. It wasn't the sort of place I frequented, but something about it caught my eye that evening. Perhaps it was the faint, golden light spilling through the dusty windows, or the way the crooked sign, Curiosities and Oddities, swayed gently in the still air. I paused in front of the door, unsure why my feet had brought me there. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of aged paper and lacquered wood, a sharp contrast to the biting chill outside. Rows of peculiar items cluttered every surface: tarnished mirrors, ceramic figurines with cracked faces, and faded books with titles in languages I couldn't recognize. The shop was eerily quiet, save for the faint ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. I wandered aimlessly until my eyes landed on a display case in the back. It was as though the pendant within had been waiting for me. Nestled on a bed of velvet, the relic shimmered faintly in the dim light. It was shaped like a teardrop, its silver surface etched with symbols that seemed to writhe under my gaze. At its center, a single deep blue stone pulsed faintly, as if it had its own heartbeat. Ah, an excellent choice. The voice startled me. An elderly man with sharp, glittering eyes appeared behind the counter, his movements as silent as a shadow. That piece is special. What is it? I asked, unable to look away from the pendant. A relic from an old world, they say, found in the ruins of a monastery, though its true origins are unknown. His voice was low and deliberate, each word laced with meaning. It's said to have a magnetic quality. The weight of his words pressed on my mind, yet I felt compelled to hold it. The man unlocked the case with a key that looked older than the shop itself and handed me the pendant. The moment it touched my palm, a shiver coursed through me, though it wasn't unpleasant. It felt like the pendant recognized me. How much? I asked, surprised at how desperate my voice sounded. For you? The man smiled faintly. A modest sum. Consider it a gift of fate. I paid without hesitation, though I left the shop with a nagging unease that clung to me like the fog outside. The pendant hung from a thin chain around my neck, its cool weight a constant reminder of the strange shop. That first night, I found myself unable to part with it. Even when I lay in bed, my fingers brushed against its smooth surface, tracing the strange patterns etched into the metal. They seemed to hum faintly, a rhythm I felt more than heard. The next day, the world felt different. As I walked through the city, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. At first, I dismissed it as paranoia. It wasn't uncommon for people to glance at one another in passing, but this was different. Their eyes lingered, an old woman at the bus stop, a man reading a newspaper on a park bench, even the barista at my usual cafe. Their gazes felt sharp and probing, as if they could see something I couldn't. By the afternoon, my unease had blossomed into full-blown dread. At work, my colleagues seemed distant, their polite smiles not quite reaching their eyes. In the office mirror, my reflection stared back with an intensity that wasn't mine, the blue stone of the pendant catching the fluorescent light and glowing faintly. "Hey, are you okay?" Claire, my office mate, asked during a coffee break. I nodded, forcing a smile. Just didn't sleep well. Her concern faded quickly, replaced by something unreadable. Her gaze flicked to my chest, no, to the pendant resting just below my collarbone, and she frowned. "That's unique," she said cautiously. I tucked it beneath my shirt, her reaction confirming my growing fear. That evening, as I walked home, I took a different route, hoping the change in scenery would shake the strange feeling that had been tailing me all day. It didn't. The streetlights buzzed faintly, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward me as I passed. A man across the street stopped walking as I approached, his eyes locking onto mine before he quickly turned away. By the time I reached my apartment, my nerves were frayed. I locked the door behind me and drew the curtains, desperate to shut out the world. Sitting in the dim light of my living room, I pulled the pendant from beneath my shirt, its glow more pronounced now in the dark. As I stared at it, a memory surfaced. A story my grandmother had told me when I was a child about a sacred object that bound its bearer to an ancient fate. The details were hazy, but I remembered her warning. Some things choose you, whether you want them or not. The pendant's hum grew louder, matching the rhythm of my heartbeat. Outside, I thought I heard the faint crunch of footsteps in the snow, though when I looked, the street was empty. My phone buzzed, jolting me from my thoughts. A message from an unknown number lit the screen. It was a single line. "You have what belongs to us." The message burned in my mind long after I had deleted it, its words echoing with an unsettling weight. "You have what belongs to us." I tried to convince myself it was some sort of prank, maybe a scam, but deep down, I knew better. The pendant's quiet hum seemed to pulse in agreement, like it understood the unspoken truth better than I did. Over the next few days, the sense of being watched became unbearable. Strangers' eyes lingered far too long, their faces eerily blank, like mannequins. At the grocery store, the cashier didn't respond to my hello. Her gaze dropped to the pendant, her fingers freezing mid-scan. She whispered something under her breath that I couldn't catch, her face pale and tense. Walking home that evening, I couldn't shake the sensation that I wasn't alone. The streets were quieter than usual, the winter air sharp and biting. The snow underfoot muffled my footsteps, making the occasional crunch of snow behind me all the more unnerving. I stopped abruptly, glancing over my shoulder. The street was empty, just rows of houses sleeping under the glow of flickering streetlights. Then I saw it. A figure stood at the edge of the nearest lampost's glow, half shrouded in darkness. They were motionless, their face obscured by the shadows. The faint sound of a low hum, almost like the pendants, hung in the air between us. I turned and hurried the rest of the way home, my breath fogging in the freezing air. By the time I locked the door behind me, my heart was pounding. Through the peephole, I saw no one, but the sense of their presence lingered like a cold draft seeping through the walls. In the safety of my living room, I did the only thing I could think of. I researched. Hours passed as I scoured the internet for anything that could explain what was happening. The symbols on the pendant weren't from any language I could identify, but fragments of myths and occult legends kept surfacing. Stories of objects that bound their bearers to ancient covenants, cults that believed in sacred marks, and whispers of rituals that linked relics to chosen bloodlines. One entry made my stomach drop. A grainy image of a pendant, eerily similar to mine, appeared on a forgotten form, accompanied by the title, "The Key to the Sacred. Beware." The thread was full of cryptic comments, warning of a group, unnamed and elusive, that pursued the artifact relentlessly. One line stood out. "Once chosen, you cannot escape. They find what belongs to them." The pendant, heavy against my chest, felt warmer now, almost alive. And then my phone buzzed again. Another unknown message. "Run all you like. You are already marked." By the time I reached the temple, dawn was a faint promise on the horizon. I had barely slept since receiving the second message. The figure outside my apartment had returned each night, always standing just at the edge of the streetlight's reach, watching without moving. Something within me, call it instinct or desperation, had pushed me to find the place the pendant seemed to call for. The map I found on the forum had led me here, a crumbling ruin hidden deep within a snow-laden forest, its columns leaning like tired giants against the pale sky. The pendant's hum had grown louder as I approached, its rhythm syncing with my pulse. Each step felt guided, as though invisible hands were ushering me forward. The temple was ancient, its stones cracked and weathered by time. Snow coated the ground, but the interior was untouched, the air unnaturally still. Symbols like those on the pendant adorned the walls, glowing faintly in the dim light. I felt an eerie familiarity, as if I had been here before, though I knew that wasn't possible. At the center of the temple, a pedestal stood, empty save for a shallow groove shaped exactly like the pendant. The hum from the pendant intensified as I approached, vibrating against my chest. "You've made it." The voice echoed through the vast chamber, soft but commanding. I turned sharply, my breath catching. A figure stepped from the shadows, their face obscured by a hood, their posture unnervingly calm. "You've been following me," I said, my voice shaking. "We've been guiding you," the figure replied. "The relic chose you. It always finds its way to its rightful keeper." "Why me?" My words felt fragile, insignificant in the vast emptiness of the temple. The figure tilted their head, their movements slow and deliberate. "It is not a question of why, but of what you will do now. The mark you bear ties you to the sacred. To resist it is futile." My grip tightened around the pendant. "I don't want this. Take it." The figure chuckled softly, the sound echoing unnaturally. "It is not ours to take. You are tied to the relic. You are tied to us." I backed away, my heart pounding. "What does it want from me?" "To unlock what has been sealed for centuries," they replied. "To complete the cycle. You are the key." The pedestal seemed to hum in response, the glow of the symbols around the room pulsing brighter. I could feel the pull now, a magnetic force urging me to place the pendant where it belonged. "And if I refuse?" The figure's silence was answer enough. The air around me felt heavier, the weight of unseen eyes pressing down. With trembling hands, I lifted the pendant, its glow almost blinding now. For a moment, I hesitated, the weight of my choice sinking in. Then, as the first rays of sunlight breached the cracks in the temple walls, I placed the pendant on the pedestal. The hum ceased, replaced by a deep, resonant tone that filled the chamber. Light erupted from the walls, illuminating symbols I hadn't noticed before, their shapes twisting into patterns too complex to follow. The air vibrated with energy, and I stumbled back, shielding my eyes. When the light faded, the figure was gone, and the pendant lay dormant on the pedestal. The mark, however, remained, etched into my skin like a brand, a reminder that this was far from over. The quiet that followed was more profound than any silence I had ever known. The air felt dense, charged with the residue of whatever had been unleashed in the temple. The pendant lay lifeless on the pedestal now, its glow extinguished, the etched symbols no longer writhing with motion. For a moment, I dared to hope it was over. But then I felt it, a faint warmth on my skin, spreading outward from my chest. I pulled my coat aside and froze. The symbols from the pendant had etched themselves into my skin, forming an intricate pattern that pulsed faintly with an otherworldly glow. It didn't hurt, but the sight of it sent a wave of cold dread through me. I stumbled back from the pedestal, my breath catching in my throat. The once dormant walls of the temple now thrummed with energy. The glowing inscriptions stretched across the stone, alive with a rhythm that mirrored the pulse beneath my skin. "You are the key." The figure's words echoed in my mind, heavy with foreboding. A faint whisper drifted through the air, just at the edge of hearing. It wasn't a single voice, but many, a chorus of murmurs weaving through the chamber. I couldn't understand the words, but their tone was unmistakable, reverent and eager, as though something was stirring from a deep slumber. Panic clawed at me. I turned and bolted from the temple, my boots crunching against the snow as I fled into the forest. The whispers followed, growing louder, their fragmented phrases swirling around me like an unseen wind. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the forest itself conspired to hold me back. By the time I reached the edge of the woods, the whispers had faded, replaced by an oppressive stillness. The snow-covered landscape stretched out before me, eerily serene, but the dread gnawed at me. I could feel the mark on my chest, warm and alive, as though the pendant's power now coursed through me. When I returned to my apartment, the familiar surroundings felt foreign, their comforting normalcy tainted by the knowledge of what I now carried. I avoided mirrors, terrified of seeing the faint glow beneath my shirt, a constant reminder that I was no longer the same. The pendant was gone, left behind in the temple, but its presence lingered like a phantom. The days blurred into weeks, and I tried to return to my life, but nothing was the same. The mark itched faintly at times, like a persistent whisper demanding attention. Strangers still watched me, their eyes filled with an unsettling mix of recognition and reverence. It wasn't just paranoia. I could feel their stares, their silent acknowledgement of what I had become. At night, my dreams were consumed by the temple. I saw its glowing walls, the pedestal, and the hooded figure who had guided me there. But the dreams always ended the same way, with a glimpse of something vast and unknowable stirring in the darkness. I would wake drenched in sweat, the mark burning faintly as if in response. One evening, as I walked home, the air grew unnaturally still. The city's usual hum had vanished, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. The streetlights flickered, their pale glow casting elongated shadows that twisted unnaturally as I passed. Ahead, a figure emerged from the darkness. They wore a hood, their face obscured, but I didn't need to see their features to know they weren't a stranger. Their presence carried the same weight as the temple, a pull that resonated with the mark on my chest. "You are bound," the figure said, their voice soft but absolute. "The cycle has begun, and the sacred cannot be undone." "What does it want from me?" I demanded, my voice trembling. "It has no want. It simply is. You are the bridge now, the link between worlds. The mark will guide you when the time comes." The figure stepped closer, their silhouette blending with the shadows. "This is not an end, but a beginning." Before I could respond, they vanished, leaving behind only the faint hum of the mark beneath my skin. In the months that followed, I tried to find answers, but the more I searched, the more questions arose. The temple remained hidden, its location erased as if it had never existed. The pendant, the messages, the figure, they all became fragments of a puzzle I could never piece together. But the mark endured. Some nights, I would stand by the window, watching the street below. Shadows would flicker in the lamplight, and I would feel their presence, the cult, or whatever they were, always near, but never seen. Their reverence was unsettling, their silent acknowledgement a constant reminder that I was no longer just myself. As the seasons turned, the glow of the mark dimmed, but it never disappeared. It was a quiet, pulsing rhythm beneath my skin, a faint reminder of the relic's power and the sacred cycle I had unknowingly become a part of. The whispers came less frequently, but they never truly left. And every now and then, when I caught my reflection in the mirror, I could see it in my eyes, a glint of something ancient and unyielding. Whatever had been unlocked in that temple was far from over, and deep down, I knew the mark wasn't just a burden, it was a promise.